I think they are key, not only for in American university. I think is in Latin American university, which I know pretty well, and also show the crisis of education itself, and then lead to the crisis of civilization itself, if you will. But nevertheless, let's begin with a few remarks about what I see the situation is, where the place of the situation is at this point. So the social and economic pressure to get a college degree, I'm talking about the United States, which is exerted on many millions of American students, impose what I would call a practical necessity, a practical need, which is the following. If you want, or the student want, economic security, and particularly social esteem, that young person, the young student, must go to college. That is something which is part of the conventional wisdom. And so this need, some people think, mitigate at the same time the need that the student have in order to get a loan to go to college. So I think that is the first topic. So the issue or the question that appeared there is the following: how much debt can a student or can the student take in order to have an education? That's a very good, I think, moral question, and some financial question, of course, as well. But I think the deeper concern is that the federal government financial stake in higher education in the American system gives sufficient leverage to exert control more directly on all over the curriculum, hiring, admissions, and many other aspects of campus life, which is not reduced to academics only, but extend to many other activities, from sport, from commercial business around university, and many other things. So two critical issues then appear in this context. The two issues are affordability. To what extent really the American university is affordable, or college are affordable for students? And second, the second issue I think we need to start thinking about is government interference. So these two issues, I think, are key. And so summarizing this point, I think it's important. A student make a need for success to have job security, and job security require a college degree. In order to get a college degree, one has to go into a college, university, and get into that, or have parents who are wealthy enough to pay for their tuition. And so if the loan is the way to go, then you have what I already mentioned, the government interference, and then you lack academic freedom and many other aspects of your own decision-making process. So what would be then the best approach? Well, that is another question. Now, the best approach, of course, common sense tells us that would be the establishment, or has been the establishment of what we may call mission-oriented institutions, which have managed to keep the government out of their affairs, and by refusing, of course, financial aid or federal financial aid. Now, that opened the door to another form of financial sources for the student, which come from the corporate world. So that there is a threat there of corporate control. So on the one hand, you have the government that is somehow involved in that with all the threat about control. And on the other, also you have the corporate world. So that's, I think, is a dilemma that is interesting to explore. And so, so what would be then an approach that I would indicate here, or just to propose? a student generally, and I think I basically agree with that, try to find a college that try to educate that student, to make him or her an educated person. And I'm in quotation educated person. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So, so to find a college that one can trust, that college can educate you as an educated person, become an educated person, as you want and need to be educated, with the goal of becoming the person that everyone aspires to be. So that opened again this idea of educated person two major questions, or critical question, I would say. One is, what sort of person am I likely to become by fulfilling this school in which I'm enrolled, this school requirement for a degree? What sort of person am I likely to become? Do I want to be that sort of person? Now, that institution, whatever that institution may be or university may be, generally give students a mission statement or a vision of the institution. Most universities and most colleges really have mission statement of that sort. They said, for instance, that you can be and do whatever you want. That's a general statement, and generally you can do whatever you want. Here is the institution we can enroll, and we are going to show you the way to go. So that shows basically that most universities are visionless when it comes to show the image of the human person, the image of what constitutes really integrity and all that. So that gave me a pause to remember something which I read a few years ago, and I have kept with me for a long time, which was a reflection made by Doris Lessing, the Nobel laureate, Nobel Prize winner in 2007, the great writer. She wrote once a very interesting remark, particularly when he was given a prize in Spain. She mentioned precisely what an educated person was, or she considered at least. She said, quote, "Once upon a time, it seems a long time ago, there was a respected figure, the educated person. It was usually he then, but increasingly often she, was educated in a way that differed little from country to country. I'm talking, of course, about Europe," she said, "but was different from what we know now." And then she continued, "Thus, an educated person from Argentina would meet a similar person from Spain. One from St. Petersburg meet his counterpart in Norway. A traveler from France spent time with one from Britain, and they would understand each other. They share a culture, could refer to the same books, plays, poems, pictures, in a web of reference and information that was like a shared story of the best human mind was thought, said, and written. However," she concludes, "this kind of education, the humanist education, is vanishing. Increasingly government, our British government among them, encourage citizens to acquire vocational skills, while education as a development of the whole person is not seen as useful to the modern society." End quote. These words by Doris Lessing show, I think, the predicament we are in today, even with more profound characteristic, if you will. So there is something paradoxical about this situation, or the situation in our own context, in the crisis of American university, which is, on the one hand, we had method that has been improving, particularly moving through new tools, technological novelties, smart classroom of all type, sophisticated equipment, etc., etc. But at the same time, on the other, none of these things has been proven to inspire the wonder and reverence that for a student is a prerequisite for pursuit of wisdom. And so we witness in classes that reaction, or that rather passivity of a student, which are completely uninterested in learning what the great tradition of the West was all about. So what we are suffering is a second aspect. This educated person, which is no longer the case, is what is suffering what I call a fragmentation. What is a fragmentation? Well, it's the education, higher education in this case, which has become a set of heterogeneous specialized studies or inquiries. And divided into heterogeneous or different subject matters. And where general education as such is just a set of introduction to these inquiries, together with a teaching of the basic skill necessary for initiation into them, so that you become an advance beyond these specialized disciplines. So everything seems to be going into fragments. And so the graduate of the best, even the best American university, tend to be narrowly focused professionals, immensely and even obsessively hardworking, disturbingly competitive, and full of with the intent to succeed in what they do. And some of them are really good at what they do. But at the same time, they don't find time, or the time is quite little that they dedicate to their family life, and their relaxation is not dedicated to read anything meaningful about the meaning of life. And so generally that idea that the activities that are given to life, or the sense of religion or faith, are completely something that may disrupt their professional life. So it seems to be that I think Lester McIntyre said once that the contemporary academic make peace, what he called a peace treaty between what? The truth of science, which claim to be objective, impersonal, etc., and then the personal truth of faith, which are called subjective, grounded, and feeling convention, and the like. So these two aspects, I think, are key to understand the reality of American education. And I think not only American education, again, I'm going to insist that it is widespread in the tradition of the West. So this impression I got when I began my graduate study here in the United States 30-some years ago. And at that point, I remember I was shocked by this lack of unity and coherence about fundamental issues. So I went to talk a professor who then was already a legend, at least a legend among certain people. His name was Dennis Quinn, was a great English teacher at the University of Kansas. He already passed away. So I asked him about orientation, about these subject matters, and he listened to me very carefully. At that point, he was already at the end of his career, and he said, what you are asking is, what is really the question? That was his answer. His answer was at the same time a question. What is really the question? And he said, I'm going to give to you a paper given by his good friend then, John Sr., with whom he founded the Integrated Humanities Program at the University of Kansas in 1970s, and then was shut down by governmental interference then. So that's a long story. But the whole point about the encounter that I had with him was just to raise the question, what was education? He provided me a clue that I will share concluding my remarks. He said, well, education is to introduce the student in the whole of reality. Nothing can be forbidden to the student. You need to show all aspects of reality. And now, if that is the case, then you need to go to the basics. And the basics that fundamentally contradict what is happening today, where instead of reading the classic or the great books, we are reading what is trending in the latest academic journals, which is not going to give you the whole of reality, rather than rather obscure issue that is discussed by a few academics who just have some aversion to different aspects of reality. Is more ideology than academic pursuit. And so what then was that question? Well, what is education that led to metaphysics, etc., etc.? But the point he said ultimately is, and I draw from him, is that what are then the alternative? Well, the alternative over the past, I have seen over the past 30 years has been, on the one hand, going back to the great books. So that alternative, I think, has been very fruitful. And so the great book, what I could be called the great book movement, which you can enlist a set of institutions there, such as which are trying to provide the necessary resources for a student to achieve and have a great education, and at the same time prevent the government to interfere with their education by not receiving federal financial aid. And I'm talking about for instance, Hilde's College, Thomas Aquinas College, began in 71, I think. Christendom College in the 70s. New St. Andrews College in Idaho, and Wyoming Catholic College, and St. Constantine College in Houston just 5 or 6 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Saddle College in Boston, et cetera, et cetera. So the set of institutions which with a rigorous academic program that are presenting the entire tradition without really making education just an ideology for one perspective, excluding all others. And so it's helping the student to truly know reality in their all faith. So in order to do that, of course, that school are convenient located and isolated small town, when students are less distracted and tempted the things of this world, et cetera, et cetera. So that has been a very, very, I think, good alternative, one of the best. And so I think Professor Hancock knows more about that than myself. So, but my point here is also to say that the task of education is so important to let only those institutions or under the patronage of those institutions the education of the young, of the youth. I think the some students, because their lack of financial aid, may not be able to afford such a school, or might be attending one which is not very effective, or as a secular institution which is not endowed with this rich tradition. So in many ways, at least for us, I think, come from this Western tradition, the That is not the only alternative, but I see as the only, it's not the only alternative to secure our identities as a human being, the Western uh, uh, tradition. So I think then the other alternative would be how then we go about, do we really have a method to confront this culture is completely fragmented in order to bring about the fulfillment of the person in what one may call a secular American university or secular contemporary university. And so I would propose there 5 points. And those 5 points are the one that I have been implementing myself in a secular institution, which I have been teaching for the past 30 years. The first point that one has to take into account is that to have as a teacher a working hypothesis. Working hypothesis, I mean a proposal of our own conviction that are coming from our past, our own tradition. And so we need to make aware the students of our own yes, tradition, our own past, our own convictions, and so that we can open from that starting point very clear without compromising a dialogue. And that is related to a second point, not only a working hypothesis, but also a sense of authority of that teacher who is proposing that working hypothesis. So the teacher must be or must restore authority. The authority is not imposed by force, it's imposed by moral conviction and intellectual conviction. And so in that sense, that teacher is the seed of that hypothesis. And that lead us to also another feature I think for that teacher must have is just be a presence. Student is moved by the presence and the conviction of the teacher. And so that helped the student to discover himself or herself, his own experience about the reality of things that is being proposed. Now, the question is, how then this reality of the student is being proposed? Because generally the teacher must believe in what is teaching. In other words, one of the characteristics of the American university is that fragmentation where the teacher is completely detached from not only his or her own experience, detached from the experience of the student, so that he or she don't want to impose his view on the other. That, I think, is a mistake because ultimately what we teach is precisely our lived experience, our own conviction, and the student follow that, or at least consider those way of thinking, those arguments as a persuasive form or being attracted to these ideas, and he or she begin his own pilgrimage toward what we call truth, the truth of the human person, what corresponds to the heart of that particular student and the heart of everyone. In other words, the sense of truth then is awakening for that presence, for that witnesses, if you will, that correspond to that teacher who has restored the sense of authority. And precisely, again, I can comment here, the sense of authority had been lost, the discipline was being lost. And so students are bored because they are not attracted, because the teacher has no sense of presence. He doesn't believe what he's teaching. He's just explaining one view, another view. And so the proposal is just a cocktail of relativism that students are not really attracted for, have not somehow triggered the sense of awe. So so I think the starting point then I would go by what I said. And there is a 4-point in addition to the lived experience and the correspondent to the hard student, that one, the teacher should not um, um, avoid or should take into consideration something which is proper to every human being, every human heart. We have the sense of awe, which we can call the elementary experience of everyone. There is a complex set of evidences and need that everyone has: the need for wisdom, the need for beauty, the need for happiness, for truth, that is in everyone's heart, and that can be awakened by the witnesses of the authority, of the sense of conviction of the teacher, so that can slowly can integrate and accompany to this teacher in his journey. But that following of the student should not be something completely blind. In other words, we are not asking to indoctrinate students rather than to witness to them the truth of reality. And so the student still can keep for himself the sense of the criticism, the sense of the critical judgment about what that tradition being passed on to him or to her is showing that student, so that he can can take what is really in his context or in his basic understanding, something that moment can be useful for him, and he go deeper and deeper in that journey, so that we can have here a sense of what I call a communion, or something that education is a movement, something that moves and is an encounter, and ultimately is a companionship, is a friendship, and that is a virtue. And that is precisely something very hard to do in American system, because the fragmentation, the government control, the regulation, and there are many other issues that make universities strictly like a supermarket where you go and buy the different goods, and as if you are not involved in the reality of what being taught. So, but concluding then this brief talk, education then, and particularly university education, is an art. I think it's a practical wisdom. It's not just a syllabus where I repeat things completely detached from reality, rather than it's an art. And it's a process by which we are making human being in that encounter fulfilled. And that sense is a passion set by, I think, the protagonists are the teachers, and we have lost that passion, and that passion has been lost again for all these elements which are come outside the university and make university to educational university education as a business rather than as an art, love for freedom and things of that sort. So concluding then my remarks, I think a true university education is that education, for instance, in physics or history or economics, is incomplete until it is to some degree illuminated by philosophical inquiry. Philosophical inquiry, which inspired basically the tradition the teacher is engaged and try to provoke to provoke, in the proper sense of the word, bring about the vocation from the student to fulfill their own needs, and that philosophical inquiry. And all education has this trait, including, I would say, philosophical education, also need to be completed and be illuminated, if you will, by theological grounded insight or theological truth. So with that, I think I finish my remark, and education began at least to be considered the introduction to the whole of reality. Thank you, and I'm open to any question. Thank you very much.